Welcome back. We've got a different reading location, and we'll see how many more I got, because I think I got a couple more, but we're going to try this out. We're going to start the next title story in the series of Earth 4. This is called Into the Blender, and this is I think my favorite section, because, well, you'll see. It gets really, really messy. So, that's probably why it's my favorite. So, we'll turn our crow light on. And we'll begin. Earth 4 Into the Blender. The Foundry's self-service fluff and fold laundromat network of cleaning and long-distance secure transport systems happened to be exceptionally busy this week. One factor in the increased laundromat use was training for all the rookie agents hired by the Foundry recently. Each rookie needed training on sending small objects in Foundry-approved watertight capsules all the way up to human transport through the machines. Each fluff and fold laundromat was equipped with adequate restrooms for all species from neighboring galaxies. Each facility had 12 machines, 6 washers and 6 dryers. Oddly though, 1 washer and 1 dryer were always out of order, no matter which fluff and fold location you were currently located. In the center of the room were tables to sort and fold clothes. Every fluff and fold was identically constructed, but even this was by design. Secretive design, known only by the director and select few others. During one particular rookie laundromat training session, Lucas Green, who is expert welder, explosives and licensed pyrotechnician, and certified laundromat trainer, he was beginning training with a brief lecture. "So listen, Agent Snuffles," said Lucas. "In review, the Foundry has 12 fluff and folds, each with 12 working washers and dryers, because harmonics are important when transporting live beings. Agent Snuffles, who was an aardvark that stood 8 feet tall on his hind legs and had a severe sinus issue, asked, 'So what about the 13th, 11th, and 12th machines?' Lucas looked at the 2 extra machines, 1 washer and 1 dryer that always had out-of-service signs on them. Lucas responded, 'Technically, they're just broken, but really, their use is classified top secret. I don't know what they're for. My clearance doesn't reach that high.' 'Interesting,' said Agent Snuffles, who turned his attention to the quarter changer machine. 'What is this?' Lucas explained that machine changed paper money into metal quarters that agents could use to run the machines for transport or simply washing their clothes. Agent Snuffles stood in place. Posture was completely aghast and asked, 'We get to use real Buddy? But everybody knows the Buddy is illegal.' Lucas smiled. 'That is why paper currency is illegal. The Foundry controls every bill ever printed. Ever since the collapse of original Earth, the Foundry put a lockdown on all Earth's artifacts.' Agent Snuffles turned in place in awe of the laundromat, finally saying, 'This is so cool.' Lucas took 3 side steps, folded his arm across his chest, and stated very clearly and loudly, 'Remember, licking doorknobs is illegal on other planets,' followed by a sound behind him. Zap, bip, snap. Agent Snuffles asked, confused, 'Doorknobs? What is that noise?' 'Rule number 3 in the Field Agent Handbook,' said Lucas, who was now fidgeting. 'Those out-of-service machines make noises sometimes.' It was daybreak, and inside the oversized windows of Agent Jane Rask's Frank Lloyd Wright home, the cresting orange sliver of the sun was just beginning to warm the kitchen. Jane put on music, her favorite blues artist, The brass horns and the slow sweeping drums led her to culinary inspiration. Jane Rask is the Aquan android. Julie, her sister, the bubblegum android. And being androids, there are definite items that are necessary and some unnecessary that both contend with to get through an average day. One necessary item for each Jane and Julie are the Masons' custom skin suits that are worn to pass as humans in society as their respective jobs. The suits are airtight, and for all intents and purposes, they look and react as genuine as can be. Jane and Julie do not need to eat organic food to survive. However, they can taste what they do eat, such that discussions about food pass as socially acceptable. Jane's habit of cigarette smoking, for instance, is driven by the sensory experience her skin cover suit has while smoking, and all applicable data is stored regarding the habit. Jane and Julie are also the only two of the 6 total androids who self-implanted hacked emotional processor chips, giving them advantages in their jobs and disadvantages among the other 4 androids. The brass horns in Jane's music in her kitchen were now teasing an all-out screech as she wriggled with delight as she danced to the refrigerator. Opening the door and carrying 4 ingredients out, she sashayed over to the counter where her blender was ready and waiting. Jane carelessly dropped all the ingredients on the counter beside the blender, opened a drawer, and produced a cutting board while removing a large chef's knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. Casually tossing the cutting board on the counter, Jane began to quickly work the knife handle through all of her fingers, spinning it with precision and accuracy, then switching hands. Still spinning the large knife with one hand, she organized the cutting board with ingredients with the other. With 6 sharp blows to the cutting board, Jane had just halved and pitted 4 avocados and diced cilantro. "Perfect," she said, carefully licking the blade of the large chef knife. Avocados, cilantro, salsa, splash of mustard all went into the blender pitcher. The brass section of the blues music grew to be slightly atonal and mean as Jane pushed buttons and declared, "Into the blender!" Jane's novel fascination with her kitchen, prepping, cooking, and eating, was boundless. The sunlight was now streaming in the window as Lucas turned the corner, which made Jane in the blender as a dark outline in contrast. In a very welcome tone, Jane spoke above the music. "Good morning, Lucas. I hope you like..." Judging by the smell, Lucas said, "Morning. Is it a wheatgrass smoothie? I could do that." Wearing a confident smile, Jane replied, Sure." Lucas removed a glass from the cupboard and presented it to Jane for the wheatgrass smoothie, while at the same time inserting a tortilla chip loaded with guacamole into Lucas's mouth and shouting, "Surprise!" Lucas stood there chewing and holding an empty glass until all he could say was, "Wow, where did you find that recipe?" Jane scrunched up her nose at him as she fed Lucas another loaded tortilla chip and said, "I must have read it somewhere." Jane grabbed Lucas by the waist with one arm, ran her other hand through his blonde locks, and said, "I love your hair, 2-souled." Lucas opened his eyes very wide and surprised and returned Jane's compliment while navigating guacamole with the question, "Oh, what?" Jane looked confused, but responded, "You know, messy, windblown, 2-souled." Lucas smiled and gestured with his fingers next to his mouth. Jane loved the elocution game. She mimicked Lucas's mouth shape and voice sound. 2-souled, two-sled, tussled. "Very good," said Lucas, and Jane scrunched up her nose at him. Over the light sound of Lucas chewing chips and guacamole, and over the light scratching of their clothing coming into contact in this embrace, and the painful yet beautiful swell and rasp of the skillful brass horns, Jane heard a vehicle approach the house approach the house gate on white gravel. Still embracing Lucas, her head at an angle at his collarbone, She fed him one more loaded chip and danced the both of them over to the monitor panel across the kitchen. With perfect timing, she reached the monitor just as the alert tone sounded, and Agent 3 was visible with his fedora and trench coat covering his face while driving the black town car. Agent 3 waved a two-finger high sign, and Jane tapped the monitor, opening the gate. "The boys are here, I see," said Lucas. Agents 3, 2, and 1 crunched their way up the white gravel path, opened the front door, and made their way up to the second floor in the kitchen, where they were greeted by Jane and Lucas. With everyone else engaged in small talk, Agent 1 discovered the guacamole and chips, ate several mouthfuls, and then declared loudly, "This is crackin'! Who made this?" Lucas used one hand to display Jane and stated, "She did." Agent 1 had guacamole on the corner of his mouth and chip crumbs in the near vicinity on the countertop. After swallowing, Agent 1 said, "Oh yeah, it's good. Hey, remember when we threw you in a washing machine in Jersey? That's good times." And Agent 1 took an overloaded bite and chewed loudly. Agent 1's chewing and the brass section were the only sounds in the kitchen. Everyone was looking at Jane, waiting for her to react, knowing that they would be powerless to actually stop her if she decided to kill Agent 1. Instead, Jane leapt vertically onto the countertop next to the chips and guacamole and started forcefully and messily eating faster than Agent 1. Now, with all the food covering most of the immediate area and Jane's legs now in a full stand, bare feet on the counter, asked Agent 1, "You want to go round two and see who ends up in the washer?" Agent 1 replied softly, "No, ma'am." Jane threw a towel at 1 and snapped her fingers, to which Agent 1 promptly started cleaning. Jane landed softly on the floor while licking guacamole from her fingers, saying, "So what's up, boys?" Agent 3, using baseball call signs, and Agent 2 using words, relayed to Jane and Lucas that the emergency interim director of the foundry had been instated last night and had already called a Protocol 1 meeting. When Jane inquired that no summons had been sent, Agent 2 replied, "Agent Rask, Mosquito Courier Systems has you blacklisted. That is the reason for this face-to-face." Making mental notes, Jane shelved the mosquito issue for now and stayed alert and present. Cleaning now complete, Agent 1 joined the group, making sure to stand next to Agent 3 as far away from Jane as possible, but still included in the group. Agents 3 and 2 continued saying key people were just fired, as well as contributing to the lack of order and verifiable information from the foundry. In addition, Jane's fight with the Nebulan twins caused massive structural damage to the foundry, but everyone present knew the majority of operations occurred deep underground, and mainly the aesthetic top layer, including the lobby with opulent but necessary director's office, were for presentation and display of power. Agents 3 and 2 carried on with details that they were sure of were accurate then. Agent 1 interrupted while pointing at Lucas, saying, "By the way, you got called in too." Jane and Lucas looked at each other with surprise. Lucas was an integral employee, but his job classification was not agent. So they were confused why he was being called to a Protocol 1 meeting. Agent 3 tapped the wristwatch on his outstretched arm so the entire group could see. Consensus was quickly reached, and Agents 3, 2, and 1 exited the house, piled into the town car, and headed for the foundry. Jane and Lucas, both dressed and were ready in no time flat, thanks to Jane running drills with Lucas, and soon both sitting in the 1966 Shelby GT350 when Lucas asked, "Why me?" Jane turned and gently held the sides of Lucas's face and replied, "There has to be a why, and if it's bad, I'm gonna make it okay. I promise." and she smiled and scrunched up her nose at him, but silently she had a very bad feeling. The Foundry's first time machine was an unassuming hexagonal floor pad with a solar charging feature to accompany the plutonium power core. In hindsight, it did not have a relative time-space tracker and unknowingly went missing at an unknown date and time or circumstance from this top-secret research and development lab. The time machine in question had now been missing for decades, and with no way to track it or yet gauge the possible irreparable damage that had been done by this ghost time traveler. Zap, bip, snap. The ghost time traveler stepped off the pad and saw an enormous crowd gathered on a warm day. Something large was flying over the crowd, and then suddenly 1,000,000 balloons began to fall from the sky. The ghost time traveler took the laser pointer from his pocket, took aim at a balloon, and it popped. Seeing the chaos that this created, the ghost time traveler stepped back onto the pad. Zap, bip, snap. The ghost time traveler now saw a man take 3 side steps, now blocking him, and say, "Remember, licking doorknobs is illegal on other planets." The ghost time traveler waited for the occupants of this room to leave, and zap, bip, snap. The ghost time traveler was now surrounded by mud. He looked up and saw a massive 6-legged panther attacking a woman. He pulled out the laser pointer at the great cat, severing one forelimb off at the shoulder. Horrified by this development, the ghost time traveler stood up straight and zap, bip, snap. At the Foundry, in the director's office, was Opal Rinderpest, Ocean, and an invisible third person were standing in the ruined office of the former director. Nothing about any part of this massive destroyed office spoke to opulence any longer. The roof was completely gone, exposing everything to the elements. The floors were blackened and warped as if it were the main deck of the Flying Dutchman itself. Every window had been shattered, and much of the wrought iron was left twisted and melted and deformed. The former director's desk and high-backed chair were no more. Curiously, the only thing left intact was the Nebulan handcrafted planetary map still hanging on the wall. The wall bookcase also had been reduced to ash, with not a tome unaffected. Opal checked her watch and scoffed. Just then, Agents Rask, 321, and Lucas Green filed in and stood at attention in a row facing the 3 already present. For an uncomfortable moment, no one spoke. Then Opal inhaled through her nose and relayed in grave detail all the pertinent information she knew so far. She, Opal Rinderpest, had been named Emergency Interim Director. Lily and Lila, the Fox women from planet Volpus, had been fired and deported back to Volpus along with the Weasel brothers, Stink, Stank, and Stunk. Enforcer raids were currently being conducted on Foundry Planet and Earth-4 for known associates of the former deportees. Jane worried for her sister Julie. Opal went on to matters of finance and accounting, the news of which was abysmally painful to listen to. Opal then beckoned with her hand and said, "Lucas Green, step forward." Lucas did as asked and was now standing between the two groups when an ice-cold blast of air rushed Lucas's face. Ocean stepped forward, roughly in front of but more to the side of Lucas, and calmly said, "Mr. Green, I recommend you stand very still and breathe normally." Jane went rigid and produced forth from her throat a whisper just loud enough that it echoed in the ruined office. "It's him." Standing offset to Lucas was Ocean, and standing directly in front of Lucas Green was none other than Death. Jane Rask, the Aquan android, could sense the presence of death from prior experience. Ocean was a silicone-based life form, and their experience of dying was different than carbon-based life forms. This gave Ocean the unique ability to see and speak to death. This was, however, awkward for the rest of the group. Death, holding his side with one bony hand and rubbing his chin with the other, faced Ocean and whipped his head back and forth between Lucas and Ocean as he said, "How is this guy doing this? I mean, he's walking around and talking." Ocean threw his hands up in the air in confusion. Remember, the group could only see and hear Ocean's reactions. Ocean directed his question at Death for the group, the invisible space in front of Lucas, and asked, "Did you track the other guy down?" Death pulled his hood tighter and leaned in on the side and whispered to Ocean, "That other guy? Wow." "Really?" said a surprised Ocean. "Well, is he going to be okay?" While pointing at Lucas. Jane was now mortified. What was happening to her most favorite person? Death was tapping his jaw with his index finger as if in deep thought, and then suddenly saying, "What? Oh, yeah, he'll be fine. Just fix your problem like I explained earlier." Death turned his head and said, "However." Death took his leave of Lucas Green, and walking the row of agents, he stopped all the way at the end in front of Agent 1. Death spun on his feet to face Ocean across the room with one bony finger vertically in front of his mouth, and then disappeared. Agent 1 commented, "Is there a draft in here?" Ocean quickly brought up Opal up to speed. Opal straightened up and stated, "These latest developments are not very palatable. Agent Rask, you stay. Everyone else is dismissed immediately." Thick with confusion and anger, Lucas and the three agents filed out of the destroyed office. Opal Rindapest walked directly up to Jane Rask and taking both her hands, said, "My dear, everything will be clear shortly. Would you like tea?" Jane was absolutely stupefied, and the only word she could say was, "Lucas?" "Tea, please, Ocean," said Opal. After drinking a full cup of strong Earl Grey, the gloss dissipated from Jane's eyes and her countenance became stoic. Ocean took Jane's empty teacup, and Opal warmly began speaking. "First and foremost, my dear, Mr. Green will not be dying anytime soon, but he is in grave danger, and you, luckily, are the only one who can help him." Jane's face contorted into a sort of "what the fuck's it" look, and she said, standing and waving animatedly into the blackened and warped floor, "Death was right here!" Jane, in that moment, could swear she heard the floorboards twist and groan under pressure like a ship at sea. Ocean and Opal explained how Ocean could see and speak with Death, and how they both kept this a secret from the former director. Opal added, "Could you imagine? That power-mad fool? What a tizzy!" Jane stood before the pair with full indignation, one hand on her hip, and flared, "So what is this really?" Ocean walked away and came back with a cardboard box of what seemed like random junk and set it at Jane's feet. Before she could respond, Ocean immediately went into a story about the top-secret research and development lab. Ocean told the history of the Foundry's Field Agent Handbook. Every agent in the Foundry's history hated its absurd, convoluted pages, nonsense words, and warnings about doorknobs. Ocean then spoke of the first time machine, completely untraceable and stolen. Opal kindly broke in for clarification. "Dearie, the problem at hand is we have a wild split-time traveler." Ocean and Opal said nothing to allow Jane time to absorb the information. Jane then got flippant. "So what of Lucas?" Ocean calmly went into another story about what caused the Foundry to long ago permanently cancel the wildly popular tours of the facilities. A long time ago, during one such tour, 3 items from the TSRDL and 1 person went missing. The items were 1 new field agent handbook, the prototype time machine that was not equipped with a tracker, and an extremely dangerous laser cutter that looked exactly like a pointer pen. "Who was this person?" asked Jane through gritted teeth. Opal pleaded, "Dearie, why don't you sit down?" Now in full defiance, Jane was now hovering 3 feet off the floor and repeated herself. "Who was the person?" "That child," said Ocean flatly, "was Lucas Green." Let's take a break.